Well, folks, it is 6:30. I just want to be sure, can everyone hear me?
Can hear you, John.
Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and I would ask Director Sliwa to take the roll call, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees. This is our roll call for our special session, public session of the Board of Education for June 10th, 2020. Trustee Barry.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Cram.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Danaher.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Jacobs.
Present.
Thank you. Vice Chair McPherson. Chair McAllister.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee McCray.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee McDonald. Trustee Parisian.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Schooler.
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Swan.
Present.
Thank you. Student Trustee Colton Kelford. Mr. Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you, Director. Item 301. I have a motion moved by Trustee Barry, seconded by Trustee Cram, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the special board meeting agenda of June 10, 2020. Would you please cast your ballots online, please?
Chair McAllister, that motion carries.
Thank you. Item 401, are there any conflict of interest declarations? Hearing none, I'm going to move to 501, budget priorities, and I will turn this over to Director Sliwa, Superintendent Loshaw, and Superintendent Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody, again. Mr. Chair, as you know, the board has been involved in a series of pre-budget deliberations to focus on what they had deemed as being program priorities that they would like to build into their annual budget process for the 2020-2021 budget year. The deliberation process, as you know, Mr. Chair, landed on three key considerations, and the criteria that the board had set for its considerations is: number one, did the consideration make schools better, and or number two, did the consideration improve the education experience for students, and or number three, did the consideration support our employees? So, Mr. Chair, as you know, through the able assistance of Trustee Don Cram, the sessions that were facilitated from January until April went from a list of interests and considerations numbering 8 to narrowed down to 4 and then to a final 2. This evening, Mr. Chair, the final 2 are being presented for the trustees' consideration and for some final direction from the board that would be incorporated into the full budget dialogue for the 2020-2021 school year. This evening we have Superintendent Bill Loshaw, who will be presenting on the elementary physical education specialist, and a slide deck will be part of that discussion so that Mr. Loshaw can walk trustees through what the considerations are. And then subsequent to that, Mr. Chair, Superintendent Deanna Perry will walk trustees through the Power Up program, or PUP program, with the intention of highlighting the options or considerations for the board for making a informed choice regarding program priorities within that consideration. So at this juncture, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Bill Loshaw, and he'll begin the presentation around the health and physical education specialist. And then after that presentation, we will pause and see, Mr. Chair, whether it be the will of the board to continue to the second presentation, or whether the board would prefer to have questions and to unpack the presentation and get to some clarification. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Loshaw.
Thank you very much, Director Sliwa. And I believe that Derek is helping with our presentation tonight, and hopefully loading the slide deck. Thank you very much for that, Derek. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to bring forward possible options for the board to consider regarding the health and physical education specialist proposal. And Derek, I'll ask you to advance the slide, please. And one more time. Thank you very much. So as trustees are aware, this initiative was identified as a priority for further review after meeting the criteria that Director Sliwa just referenced during the trustee budget planning session. And specifically, this program proposal was seen as one that certainly would make schools better, improve the education experience for students, and support our employees. So we understand and appreciate the interest that trustees have in investing in the health and well-being of our students, and we look forward to, or I look forward to, outlining various options for this program proposal this evening. And I should mention specifically as well that we appreciate the interest that trustees have not only in the physical health of our students, but the social emotional health as well. Derek, I will ask you to advance one more time, please. Thank you for that. So before outlining the options, I think it's important to recognize the connection between the vision of the health and physical education curriculum and our board's mission. So with that in mind, I would point out that the health and physical education curriculum is really based on the vision that the knowledge and skills students acquire in the program will benefit them throughout their lives and enable them to thrive in an ever-changing world. The program focuses very much on the whole child, and in that respect, it is certainly aligned with our board's mission of preparing all students for a successful life. Next slide, please. Thank you. As trustees know, the expectations for health and physical education are organized into 4 distinct but related strands. They are the social emotional learning, active living, movement competence, and healthy living. It's important to note that the focus of the health and physical education program program proposal is on all areas of the health and physical education curriculum. I think it's important to note that it's much more than teaching students how to do a layup, and trustees are well aware of that as well. Next slide, please. And from our previous discussion, it was very clear that trustees have a keen interest in helping students to increase their fitness levels, but also to help students learn to take care of themselves, form healthy relationships, and lead healthy lives. The implementation of the Health and Physical Education Specialist Program proposal will support the following outcomes related to increased student achievement, of the health and physical education curriculum and improve student health and well-being overall. As a result of this initiative, we would see that there would be increased capacity for teachers of health and physical education to implement all aspects of the curriculum, that there would be a more consistent commitment to active living practices in all schools with a structured daily physical activity model, that there would be explicit instruction and increased student engagement of social emotional learning skills, and that there would be effective and engaging learning opportunities that represent best practices to achieve the overall expectations of the health and physical education curriculum. Also, I think it's important to note that the program proposal presents options to support a deep implementation of the curriculum through a school-based allocation, while also building system capacity through the support of a learning partner or learning partner resources. Next slide, please, Derek. Thank you very much. Also think it's important to outline some considerations to help support an informed decision. And to that end, I would say that, and I believe trustees are aware, as well as anyone at this point in time, that there are many uncertainties with respect to school reopening. And that's just a reality and one that we are working through, as trustees are aware. I would also want to point out that the options presented this evening in this proposal do not represent a full implementation of the initiative. The options do, however, allow us to trial the experience and identify the benefits. As well, it's possible that this initiative could be more affordable if aligned with regular staffing processes. Trustees would know that we are beyond that point for this current school year. Next slide, please, Derek. Thank you very much. So with this information shared with you so far, trustees are presented with 3 options and with 3 different implementation dates. The 3 options are categorized as being low, mid, and high, and they are outlined in the following slides. So trustees will see that in the first slide was an implementation date of September. For low, our staffing requirements would be 1 learning partner and a half-time health and physical education specialist in 11 schools. Related expenses with that would include professional development for the learning partner and travel costs as well, for an implementation in the low category of just under $800,000. The mid category has a very similar staffing model with 1 learning partner and a half-time health and physical education specialist, but in 15 schools, so an increased number of schools and the same related expenses, bringing the total cost of the initiative to just over $1 million. And the high category, we have an increase in the number of learning partners from 1 to 2, and an increase in the time, not a half-time health and physical education specialist, but a full-time specialist in 20 schools, as opposed to 11 in the low and 15 in the mid. And again, moving from a half-time to a full-time specialist. That cost for the high-level implementation would be approximately $2.6 million. Derek, I will ask you to advance to option 2, please. Thank you. So option 2 really outlines the same proposal, the low, mid, and high categories, but given the uncertainty that we are facing right now, then we would be considering a November start date. And if we were to follow the same staffing models as outlined previously, looking at a November start date, then we would have an implementation of the low category at just over $600,000, the mid at just over $800,000, and the high at just over $2 million. Next slide, please, Derek. Thank you. And also, due to the uncertainty that we're looking at currently, then we would also outline the possibility of a January start date for this program proposal. And if we were to do so, again, looking at the same staffing model, similar expenses related to professional development and travel, we would look at a low implementation with a January start date of being under $500,000, mid of just over $600,000 and a high costing approximately $1.6 million. Next slide, please, Derek. Thank you. So recognizing that students' health and well-being contributes to their ability to learn in all subject areas, not simply in just in health and phys ed, and that this learning in turn contributes to their overall health and well-being, the following options are presented. A would be consideration for the implementation of option 1, option 2, or option 3. B, consideration for further development of the health and physical education specialist concept, with a review at a later date when the proposal is further developed and prepared for implementation at a time when there is more certainty regarding the model of instruction within our system. Or C, and as always, to explore other options if requested by trustees. So that concludes my presentation on the Health and Physical Education Specialist Program proposal, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
So, Mr. Chair, over to you. What would be the pleasure of the board at this point? Would you wish the presentation to continue with Superintendent Perry building on this, or would you wish the trustees to have some time to inquire further on the information that Mr. Loshaw just presented?
Hang on here. Trustees, I guess I'm going to turn this over to you. What do you think? I have a different screen here. I'm sorry.
I think I'd like to deal with it one by one, if that's possible.
You mean this one first, Trustee McDonald?
Yeah.
I concur with that, please, Trustee Swan.
I also concur, Danaher.
I am sensing consensus, so we will proceed with the consideration of this one first.
Good.
You have a speaking order, John?
I'm having some difficulty because when I go to the chat line, I'm on a previous meeting. I just don't know how to get out of that. Can Derek help me, or Lisa?
So if you highlight at the bottom of the meeting rather than on the left-hand side, on the bottom of the meeting there where it shows request, control, live, all that, if you click on show conversation, it'll give you the chat that's associated to this meeting. It's a little conversation screen in the middle of the.
Yeah, I see. I had that initially, but I don't have it now. I'm going to get out of here.
Mr. Chair, it's Steve speaking. Would you like the Vice Chair to continue while you try to round back to the correct screen? We have two questions so far in the queue, one from Trustee Cram and one from Trustee Parisian.
So we're going for a discussion of the three priorities with regard to the physical ed, right?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. And in your speakers list so far, you have Trustee Cram, Trustee Parisian, Trustee McCrae, and Trustee McDonald.
Cram, Parisien, McCrae,
and McDonald.
Trustee Cram, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I know there's a motion that is going to come forward. I believe you have it. On protocol or on procedure, do you want the motion introduced first and so that's on the floor and then questions, or do you just want to do questions on the presentation and then the motion for discussion?
I would suggest questions in general first.
Okay.
About the
Then my
topic.
question, sorry, that's fine. Then my question to Superintendent Loshaw would be, if we went to the high-end presentation for January, how disruptive is that to the staffing process and to schools to occur in the middle of the year?
Mr. Chair, we'll just check to see if Superintendent Loshaw is not on a muted mic at the moment.
My apologies through you, Mr. Chair. I do apologize for having some challenges with my mute button. So through you, Mr. Chair, in response to Trustee Cram's question, the staffing process begins in the spring, and therefore it'd be important to note that a January start date would result in some changes within our schools, depending on who is hired into these positions, and that would be just something that we would need to be aware of.
Thank you.
Trustee Parizien?
Through you, Chair. I guess my question is based on the presentation. We're sort of designated the pilot of this to 3 groups of family of schools. Have we looked at the options of sharing it amongst a larger family of schools, but remaining it still at 15 schools? That is a large piece of money to reserve for this initiative. I was just wondering if we've looked at a wider range of having schools across the board.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the considerations brought forward this evening were a starting point with trying to build system capacity, I guess, or capacity within a family of schools, and therefore the schools selected were by family of schools initially, and then within the mid category, the Cornwall family of schools was added, so not the entire family of schools for Superintendent Rudders. And then in the high category, then the elementary schools that Superintendent McNair currently supports were also included. A consideration was not given to some schools within each family of schools, but that could be looked at if that's something the trustees were hoping to see.
Trustee McCray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question echoes very much Trustee Parisien's. I would want to see it across the board, however it comes out. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a number of concerns and just a preliminary comment. So I know we've used some language at the beginning of this about how this has been adopted by trustees, or we've moved this. To my knowledge, I don't think we've ever endorsed this as a board, a corporate board. This comes out of a planning session. And this is really our first opportunity to determine whether we want to endorse this or not as a corporate entity. So the dot matrix voting process isn't recorded as a corporate entity and a corporate activity. So I appreciate the fact that we did have some discussion around it, but I don't know that we've endorsed it completely yet. So I want to clarify that first. The second piece I want to go through is is when I look at the process that's used, we do have a staffing process in April, and that's a huge undertaking for our principals and a huge undertaking for our system. When we look at that and we try to implement adding additional staff, there's a huge disruption then to when we do that, whether it's September, whether it's November, whether it's January. And so, you know, my recommendation and feeling is that this be put on the back burner and be discussed further, so that we can implement it at a later date and endorsed through the work that we're going to do for the next year's budget, would be 2021, 22. That would allow for the proper staffing process to occur and a full identification of what our costs would be. When I look at the overall cost, they're quite high, considering that we only have a small portion of schools associated to it. And so, you know, if we look at this as a full-scale implementation, when we see the report as a high, the high isn't even full scale. The high is 20 schools. And so, you know, when I look at that at over $2.5 million, you know, let's triple it at a small scale level. And our costs are going to be in the neighborhood of almost $20 million. Oh, sorry, $10 million. So, you know, when we look at the cost associated to implementing something like this, I'm not convinced that that's where I want to spend $10 million to be able to achieve what we potentially think would be achievable. Because I think there are programs in place that accomplish what we have, and I think that's an important aspect, is that as we review this process, we need to make sure that we understand how the curriculum is being implemented in our current school situation and how we address the concerns or the issues that were raised. And just by throwing more money or adding these pieces into play, we don't know what the impact is on the other things that we're doing. And I think that's an important aspect that we need to uncover and bring forward as well. My final concern at this point is that given the situation that we're in, we don't know what September looks like, but we also know that it's likely going to be a little different than what we've been used to if school does resume. And so if school does resume, we need to make sure that we understand that we are going to be supporting kids in a different way. And if we have additional resources that are required, perhaps our additional resources are going to be used or should be used to support the kids and the students from the impact of the last 3 months or so. So, you know, aside from that, we need to make sure that we have available resources to do those types of things. We don't know if kids will be in school full time or whether kids are going to be in school part time or in a phased in approach. So that makes this even more complex and more difficult to establish if we're trying to solve and deal with an issue for kids when not all of them are going to be there. And this would be very difficult to be able to do in a virtual format. Then we also have the travel aspect associated to it. And I think, you know, when we look at how we're going to do things moving forward as a board, we want to limit the travel. We want to limit the opportunity for people to go from building to building. You know, this is the things that we've learned over the last 3 months. So if we have people that are transient in the sense that they're moving from building to building, you know, maybe this is not the one that we want to start with. Maybe this is not the one that we want to implement, because we want to make sure that we have reduced those opportunities for people to move from site to site and interact with different classes on site to site levels. So, you know, unfortunately, I don't see the true value from a cost perspective to get this. I think that there's more information that's required to be brought forward so that we as a corporate board understand what other implications or what other resources we have in place that might be achieving what we're looking to achieve for this. So at this point, I'm not prepared to commit and move forward with this on many levels. But I think we're late out of the gate for this year as the primary one. In the secondary levels are around what we don't know what school's going to look like in September, and I think we need to make sure that we move cautiously on that and not exert any resources to something that we don't need to at this point.
Thank you, Trustee McDonald. I'm on the proper chat line, and I apologize for that. So I see a question from Trustee McPherson.
Thank you. It was my recollection that there was to be a mental health aspect to this position. Also, I have a little concern about the overall costs. It seems awfully expensive for a handful of schools. Are we going to run a pilot? Are we going to analyze it and decide whether to proceed with a phase-in or not? It seems to be a focus on the elementary panel, and I personally would urge caution on change, especially this fall. There's going to be enough things change that are beyond our control without implementing more. So it seems like a good idea, but when you factor in to bring it to the whole board, it gets pretty expensive, and we have yet to know exactly what our revenue flow is going to be. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Trustee Swan, you have a comment?
Yes, I too have extreme concerns about the cost factor of this for a handful of schools and the timing. And I also was very, very surprised. I know we did some online voting about our priorities, but I was surprised when I saw this came up as second. And I would like to revisit some of our other choices for our second priority. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Swan. Trustee Cram. I think I can speak for Trustee Cram because he has sent me this motion. And the motion that he has proposed is that the Upper Canada District School Board delay the implementation of health and physical education specialists until September 2021 to ensure that an appropriate emphasis is incorporated in the assignment with the following guidelines. 1, during the 2020-21 school year, the presented proposal is developed further with the intent to implement option 1 in 2021, implement option 2 in 2022, and implement option 3 in September 2023. And that the Upper Canada, Trustee Cram, you seem to have a second part there. Do you want that one included in this or not?
No, because the second part pertains to the other option.
All right, Trustee Cram, would you like to speak to this, please?
Thank you, Chair. When the motion came forward when the presentation came forward for us to preview, I saw some of the issues that other people have had at the same time, and therefore I think this is a worthwhile endeavor for us to go through, but I think we need to take more time to look at it with the emphasis to go over a phase-in period. I think there's a seconder for it with John Danaher as well.
Yes, I would second it, yes.
Chair, I have a comment or question, I guess, concern.
Go ahead, Trustee McDonald.
I think this motion, though, is really, it's putting the cart before the horse. We're in a situation where I think that we've all, or I shouldn't say, oh, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think there's an opportunity for us to explore this further. But by passing this motion, it commits us to a future budget item that we haven't even determined whether that would be a priority when we look at deliberations moving forward. So, you know, I'm concerned that we're dealing with a budget for 2020, 2021, but this motion actually commits money in a 2021, 2022 budget, which we are not discussing. And I think that, you know, it's important for us to understand the impact moving forward and have further discussions. My suggestion would be that we don't we kill this motion and that we allow this to have further research and further reports back to the board. And at a later time, we can decide whether this becomes part of the 2021-2022 school year budget. For that commitment to take place today, I don't think that's very good and very fiduciary from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint, committing money before we know the full outcome of the cost.
Trustee McDonald, I think you have raised an excellent point. May I suggest that this motion be withdrawn and reworded to, and I'll tell you what the rewording would be. And I'm not reading it into the record, but I'm telling you what the motion might be. And that is that the focus for health and physical education specialists identified through the trustee planning sessions during January 2020 to April 2020 is the focus of staff reports for discussion during 2020-2021 for possible inclusion in the 2021-2022 budget deliberations. If we were to propose that motion and withdraw Trustee Cram's motion, would that satisfy the intent of the board?
Through you, Chair.
Go ahead, Trustee McDonald.
Trustee Schooler here.
Oh, Trustee Schooler, sorry.
Is it appropriate this time to ask a question about the costs, or should I wait?
Well, I certainly would not disallow you from asking a question about the costs, but I think if I could summarize the discussion here, it seems to me that there's a feeling that this is premature for consideration in this budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess my question.
If you want to ask your question, go ahead, Trustee Schooler.
Sure. So my question around cost is, to what degree are any of those options that relate to the cost reflective of the fact that new staff has to be hired, as opposed to principals reorganizing the staffing in their schools and therefore able to cover all of the other requirements to run their schools? And I have a second question as well, if I may.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Trustee Schooler.
Oh, okay. My second question then is, there seems to be an assumption on the part of some of my colleagues that the expectations that are part and parcel of the health and phys ed curriculum are being adequately covered already in our elementary schools. And I would be interested to know if that is indeed the case. And if staff could, confirm that the curriculum that, as Superintendent Loshaw pointed out, not only deals with how to shoot a layup, but also deals with social and emotional and many other health concerns that we all have at this time in our board. So yeah, I'd be interested to know from staff, are the expectations being adequately covered, as some trustees seem to feel that they are? So 2 questions there.
I understand Superintendent Ferguson might like to answer this question.
Mr. Chair, through you, it's Stephen here. I think there's 2 questions here from Trustee Schooler. One is about the staffing question about how this could be approached. And I think Mr. Ferguson, as the HR superintendent, would be well positioned to be able to comment. The second question from Mr. Schooler was about program implementation and assessment. And so I would turn that over to Mr. Loshaw, but perhaps Mr. Ferguson could speak first. Mr. Chair, if that's through you.
By all means.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just want to do a sound check to ensure you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great. So I think if I understand Trustee Schooler's question, I think what he is referring to here is the fact that in our schools, we already have teachers that cover the physical education and health curriculum. And if what he is suggesting is that perhaps rather than creating new positions and hiring new staff, that rather we designate certain people in schools to be the to fulfill this role, to have a focus on the curriculum and to have a designated person rather than individual teachers currently, who in most of our schools, individual teachers currently teach physical education and the health curriculum component, just like they do all the other subjects. So at elementary schools is different than secondary. You'll have an elementary teacher teach a variety of subjects. We do have some splitting where French immersion students will have a French teacher teach half of the day, an English teacher teach the other half of the day, and then you'll also have 1 or 2 teachers doing the prep time coverage for those folks. So if what Superintendent Trustee is, if what Trustee Schooler is suggesting is that rather than incurring further costs, the principal timetable, as he said, the school, so that those folks, you have designated people in there, that would change the cost factor as the trustee has suggested. There would be some considerations, but certainly the cost factor would be different if you're using existing staff and having a designated person. And I'll add that in some of our schools, the larger schools, some principals have timetables to their school that way, where you have a person that is designated and they teach on a rotary basis all of the physical education and health curriculum to the students at school.
Trustee Loshaw, would you care to comment further or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would certainly be happy to comment on the second question, unless you're looking for further information to what Superintendent Ferguson just shared.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee
McPherson, you have a question? Trustee McPherson?
Yes, right here. Sorry. Way too many buttons to push here. I believe that what we need to do is to, as a second motion, in fact, we have no motion yet because nothing's been moved or seconded. But I think the best direction here is, I think you've got a great idea, but it needs more fleshing out. Again, I come back to the uncertainty of September 2020. I'd like to know how it compares to the status quo. Do we have any elementary schools that use a designated phys ed teacher, or is it the practice for the grade 3 teacher teaches everything including phys ed to her students? So I'd like to see a little more depth in the report. I'd like to see something that can be under consideration for next year's budget. We're working in strange times right now, and I'm very cautious on too much change when nothing is really as we have known it. Thank you.
Trustee Cram, we have a motion on the floor. Do you still wish to proceed with it, or would you like to withdraw it in the light of the one that I proposed?
Chair, I was hoping because I can't move your motion because I've already got the motion on the floor, I was hoping somebody else would. But if it is easier for me to agree to have it as an amendment to my motion or a substitution for my motion, I have no problem with that because the concept is still there. Let's take it back and take a look at it again and bring it back again. So I'm at your will whether you want to just change it with John. If John would agree, we would just change it to that motion you put forward, or whether somebody else is willing to put an amendment on the floor.
So you'd rather do it by substitution as opposed to withdrawal?
I'm willing to do that if that's the will of the people, but I like your suggestion of what the motion should be. But if it either has to be somebody else moving it, or if everybody agrees or John agrees to make it a friendly amendment, then we can, or a friendly motion, we can just substitute.
All right, I'm going to go the route of substitution.
Okay.
Who's speaking, please?
It was Trustee McDonald. I was going to suggest the cleanest way is to withdraw the motion that's on the table and then put forward the new motion. That way we're clean, because technically it's not really a friendly amendment. It would require a mover and a seconder again. So if that's the will of the board, withdraw the current motion that's on the floor by Cram and Danaher, and then the new motion would go forward.
I agree.
I have no problem with that, and I would ask John if he's willing to be a seconder on the new motion.
Absolutely. I'm in agreement.
All right, I will consider that motion withdrawn. We will be making a second motion. I will be looking for a mover and a seconder. And the motion reads as follows: that the focus for a health and physical education specialists identified through the trustee planning sessions during January 2020 to April 2020 be the focus of staff reports for discussion during 2020-2021 for possible inclusion in the 2021-2022 budget deliberations. I'm looking for a mover, please.
That would be myself and John Danaher. Everybody agrees?
Yeah. I move it.
I open the floor then for discussion on that motion. Hearing none, I would ask that you cast your ballots, please. Now I've lost board docs myself. Jeez. Get out. I'm voting now.
Chair McAllister, okay. That motion carries.
Thank you very much. Then I assume that we are now going to proceed to the second part of that presentation, which deals with the POP programs. So, Director, who is presenting here?
Mr. Chair, that would be Superintendent Perry. And again, the proposal here is the staff is following up on recommendations brought forward. Mr. Chair, just in my Secretary of the Board hat, it might be important just to ask the Assembly if they believe that the same set of considerations that was applied to the first presentation may need to be here as well, and that might be of some value as the presentation unfolds and that context is clear. So the point here, Mr. Chair, would be, would the Assembly like to propose a motion similar to the previous one, or does the board believe that this topic is in a different place and we should just proceed with the presentation and see if there's any motion that trustees would like to make afterwards?
I think we should proceed with the presentation, but I agree that the same consideration for this discussion should apply as did the previous one. So let's have the presentation first, and then we'll come to that second motion, which perhaps, Director, you might want to send me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will do. We'll turn it over to Superintendent Perry then. And Mr. Chair, we'll make sure that Ms. Perry is not muted there.
So through you, Mr. Chair, are you able to hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. I've been having some challenges with my microphone, so I've had to go with my without the headset here. So I will try to do my best. If you have difficulty hearing me, please let me know. As trustees will recall, the Power Up program was implemented as a pilot program during this school year. The program was a direct recommendation of the special education review that was undertaken in the 2018-29 school year. And the review that was conducted consistently noted that there was a fundamental need to pivot the service delivery model in the Upper Canada District School Board that would best serve our students through a flexible, evidence-based, and financially feasible approach. So the Power Up program evolved from this recommendation with two levels of support. Power Up 1 is the foundational model of support that we would like to see functioning in all of our schools. Students assigned to the regular classroom access the supports of a special education teacher in a variety of ways for just-in-time supports. Power Up 2 is a distinct classroom placement for an academic year, and students accessing this kind of a classroom are placed in this the classroom through the decision of an identification, placement, and review committee at the school where the classroom operates. The placement is dependent upon parental consent to the placement. The focus of Power Up 2 is to support students in developing a full readiness for the school experience. It provides intensive supports in smaller group settings and allows for the practice of essential self-regulation and social emotional skills, while at the same time improving and promoting the academic program for the students. Data collected from both Power Up 1 and Power Up 2 this year have shown incredible promise and hope for students who before were very unsure in their school experience. Improvements in literacy and numeracy have been noted. There are less office referrals, fewer suspensions, and more days being spent at school by students who are accessing these programs. Parents, students, and staff have given very positive feedback. Special education teachers are better able to focus their time with fewer transitions between classrooms and more time being spent directly with students. We've also seen an increase in the number of special incidents portion applications as a result of the time special education teachers are being able to provide direct support to students. Derek, if we could go to the next slide, please. So the initial results that we have seen during this school year are promising and indicative that an expansion to the Power Up program would be beneficial. It is important to note that there are several considerations that should be taken into account when we're looking at an expansion and possibly undertaking an expansion. The global pandemic has introduced many uncertainties into our work, and therefore we need to proceed with caution during the upcoming school year. A measured and more conservative approach is needed to ensure that we have the human resources that are needed during reopening where those human resources will be essential. We still don't know what our school year startup is going to look like, when it will begin, how many students will attend. There are a lot of uncertainties around the beginning of our school year. And we also have to ensure that our central special education department can manage the growth, the professional development needed, and the monitoring and implementation of any new site that is considered, while continuing to monitor the current sites that are in progress at this time. Derek, can we move forward, please? Thank you. So I'm going to present to you 3 different options for the expansion of Power Up in the next few slides. You will see one highlighted column in blue in the presentation that reflects what we believe, given current circumstances and future uncertainties, that we would have the capacity to develop in the upcoming school year. Each of the options that will be provided this evening will provide 3 different levels, and I'm going to speak very briefly to each one. So in option 1, this represents a very conservative approach to expanding the program. A very low-level option within this option would be to maintain the current 13 Power Up 1 sites and the 4 Power Up 2 sites that are currently in progress. This would provide an opportunity to monitor implementation and collect data from the pilot sites. And this option is presented. We haven't had a full year of the pilot, so this is an option to permit us to gather further data and have more of a full year experience. A second level within option 1 provides for an expansion of Power Up 1 to an additional 5 schools. And the overall expense of this would be $123,500 for special education teacher allocation and some professional development. The third level, and the one that is highlighted in blue, which would be recommended to trustees this evening, is an additional 5 schools to the Power Up 1 program and 4 Power Up 2 classes. The Power Up 2 classes would not be implemented until, actually 2 Power Up 2 classes, my apology. It wouldn't be implemented until January 2021 to provide for startup and school functioning and to adapt to our next reality and to be in a position where we might be offering full face-to-face regular educational programming for students. The total expense for this reflects the addition of special education teacher allocations, educational assistance, and training for an approximate cost of $305,000. Derek, we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. In option 2, the first level would be a low-level option, would add an additional 6 schools to Power Up 1, and the expenses related to that would be for the allocation of special education teachers and also professional development with a cost of $144,000 approximately. A mid-level in this option would see an additional 12 schools added to Power Up 1 and 10 additional Power Up 2 classrooms added in the district in January of 2021. The estimated expense of $1.6 million reflects special education teacher allocation costs, educational assistant costs, and training costs as well. And a high-level implementation in option 2 would add an additional 35 schools, which would provide some special education teacher allocation for Power Up 1, an additional 16 Power Up 2 classes. The overall estimated expense for this, including special education teacher allocation, educational assistance, and professional development, would be $2.3 million. Derek, we can proceed to the next slide, please. The third option would be one that would be very much an ambitious approach to implementation. The low level within this option would see a full implementation of Power Up 1 in all of our schools. This would represent $1,500,000 approximately as an expense for additional special education teacher allocations and professional development. A mid-level option within this third option would have 16 additional Power Up 2 programs and a full implementation of our Power Up 1, and that would lead to an approximate expense of $3 million when we look at the allocation of special education teachers, educational assistants, and professional learning. And finally, the last option presented as the high option in this category, we would see a complete and full implementation of Power Up 1 in all schools and 16 additional Power Up 2 classes to be implemented in September of 2021. For an approximate cost of $4.5 million. Derek, we can move ahead. As stated earlier, an incremental and measured approach to the expansion of Power Up program is really recommended. Looking forward, it would be really ideal to plan for an incremental approach with an end goal in mind for full implementation of Power Up 1 in all of our schools within 5 years. The increase to the number of Power Up 2 classrooms is going to be dependent on the success of the implementation of Power Up 1. As capacity is built in all of our schools through a Power Up 1, the greater the possibilities that exist for serving all of our students, including those whose needs are most difficult to serve. We can move ahead, Derek, please. So it is recommended to proceed with a small increase to Power Up 1 program in 5 schools and to bring the total number of schools with Power Up 1 programming to 18. Sorry, we have 13 currently running. It is further suggested that we consider adding an additional 2 Power Up 2 classes in January, as long as our schools are back to a more regular functioning. Derek, we can go ahead. So there are a number of considerations that were factored into the recommendation that's being brought forward this evening. First and foremost, the global pandemic has created considerable uncertainties, including how and when school is going to begin, the number of students that will be attending school, a number of different factors that have us questioning various aspects of regular schooling. School closures and the other interruptions that we've had during this school year have not really permitted a full implementation of the pilot program. A small increase would allow a continuation of the pilot program during the 2020-2021 school year, but would also help us develop a model for an incremental increase as we move forward. The financial uncertainties that are related to the global pandemic make it even more important for us to really focus on ensuring that any increase to the Power Up program is based on a financial capacity to support the expansion. We have to ensure that the Central Special Education team also has the capacity to support the professional development necessary for the expansion of the model. And Power Up 1 really should be the service delivery model for special education in our schools. The incremental approach to expansion permits us to grow depth and spread, building capacity and sharing our learning within the school and within our schools and across the district. Derek, we can move forward, please. As final considerations, despite the disruptions that we have seen during this school year, both Power Up 1 and Power Up 2 pilot sites have provided very encouraging results with positive feedback from staff, students, and family. A cautious approach to expansion needs to be considered at this time, given the uncertainties that we are facing. The Central Special Education Department can support an incremental increase as we move forward, barring any other unforeseen barriers that might present themselves. And the Power Up program, as it grows and is fully developed through the system, will provide more precise service for our most vulnerable of students, and it will increase the capacity of all of our educators to differentiate and engage in tiered interventions. And that brings to conclusion the information that I'm bringing forward this evening, and am open to questions.
So the floor is open to questions, trustees. If you indicate on the chat line your question or desire to pose a question, and I'll recognize you in that order. I don't see anybody, but there must be some questions. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, it's Trustee McDonald.
Go ahead, Trustee McDonald.
Thank you. So when I look at the report, and I know it's been listed as 3 options. There's really 9 options here for us to look at, with 3 within each of the options. So it's a little hard for me to determine, from I guess an implementation standpoint and the impact and understanding, possible benefits or outcomes associated to it. Depending on what we did, right? If we did mid option 3, what does that mean versus mid option 2 or high level option 2? So I think, we need to examine this a little bit more. I like the concept. I think there's there is a true benefit to the schools. I've seen it and received the feedback, but I think, to Superintendent Perry's comments, I think we need to be cautious on what September looks like in the new year, and we haven't had a full year of implementation on the existing program. So I think maybe we maintain what we have moving forward for 2020 and 2021, and start to build a little bit more around what it would look like for 2021, 2022. That would be my suggestion. But I do have a question for Superintendent Perry around whenever you have the point on the second last slide. Power Up 1 should be the foundational model. Can you, when you say that, does that mean that if we move to a Power Up model for delivery of special education, is it possible then that we would have savings in other places as a result of everyone doing the same thing rather than having a bit of a piecemeal approach? Is that possible, or is that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is a hope of the expansion of the program, because as we build capacity through all of our schools with differentiation and tiered interventions, we are increasing the regular classroom teacher's capacity to address needs where the special education teacher may currently be addressing those needs. So as we go up the tiers into a tier 2 or a tier 3, our special education teachers will have more time to spend with students who have tier 2, tier 3, where our classroom teachers will be managing tier 1 as we build that capacity. So there is great potential within this as we move to a model that becomes foundational in service delivery to really increase capacity. So yes, there could be savings elsewhere.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Trustee.
Thank you, Superintendent Perry. I think the other piece that I'm cautious about is we anticipate that we would get some SIP funding with this, and I think it would be important for us to see what a full implementation looks like and the potential for what SIP funding would be coming to the board. And once we have an understanding of how that rolls out and how that plays into to our funding model, I think there's an opportunity for us to re-examine and really look at how we would do this. And I think if the delivery model of this is really the focus for the future of special education, I think that's good. But I think at this point in time, we need to be a little bit more cautious and maintain status quo and continue to do the good work and the hard work that we're doing to see the results, but then also see what the funding looks like. So I think that would be my recommendation, but I'll certainly allow for discussion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Vice Chair McPherson for a comment.
Thank you. What we're proposing here is a low-key approach to implementation of a recommendation that came out of our special education review. To refresh everyone's memory, the high needs amount was dramatically reduced over the past 4 years by the tune of roughly $11 million. It was that money that we used to support students in classrooms through EA allotments. It was the recommendation of that report that we pursue the special incidents funding. There's no prediction on a revenue stream here, but I can assure you that what we had discussed at SEAC is it has the potential for being substantial. I think staff are taking a good approach at phasing it in slow and phasing it in right. Adding an additional 5 schools is not going to stress our resources. There is also a huge demand from parents and schools for this program. It has worked for us. So I'm urging us to accept the staff recommendation and move ahead with a slowly phased in movement to the new model as recommended by our spec ed review. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Trustee McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Superintendent Perry, is this Power Up program as it stands now available to all wards? Or all wards have examples of it in their schools?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have 13 different Power Up 1 programs running throughout the district, and we have 4 Power Up 2 that are running. So the Power Up 2 does not have the spread that Power Up 1 does at this point, and that's just simply by virtue of the fact that it's a more intensive program requiring larger number of supports. So yes, this is dispersed through the district in the Power Up 1 model.
Follow up? Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes, go ahead, Trustee McCray.
Thank you. I guess I'm wondering if any of the 17 are in my ward, Ward 5. Yeah.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I do know that we specifically placed at least 1 Power Up 1 in each one of the wards.
Thank you very much, Mr.
I'm going to move to Trustee Parisien. Question?
Yes, thanks, John. Through you, Chair, I guess I sort of have a two-part question. Based on the presentation, I believe it's Deanna's recommendation for option 1 high, if that's correct. Is that correct, Deanna?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is the option that we believe that is viable and sustainable at this point from the Central Special Education Department.
And I guess I have a follow-up to that, Chair. Do we have 1, enough schools to fill the list? And 2, if let's say school is not running as semi-scheduled in September, will we be out funding for the staff allocation that we're doing for January? Meaning, if we don't have students in the school by January, are in the school on a scheduled basis, will we have expensed the money and now the students can't use the resources?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think I heard 2 questions in there in terms of, do we have enough schools to be able to support the request for Power Up, if I understood that correctly. In that one, we had over 77 schools request the Power Up program, saying that they wanted to run the Power Up program. So that's a very good indication that there's big interest in running the program. For the 5 Power Up 1 schools that we would be suggesting for implementation in the fall, we would be selecting schools that we know the additional special education teacher allocation increment that would be provided would be very well served in those schools to meet the needs of the students on the ground, regardless of how many students actually are coming back at any given time. For the Power Up 2, it really is dependent on a return to a more full face-to-face model. So it's something that would likely need to be revisited in the fall, not in the fall, sorry, in January. The Power Up 2 model is really based on face-to-face programming. At that point, it is our assumption that we'll have most of our students hopefully returning back and able to participate in Power Up 2.
Great, thank you, Deanna.
Trustee Swan?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify as well with Superintendent Perry, but I think she answered it pretty well with Trustee Parisien, but I just want to clarify. The Power Up 1 supports if we add 5 schools as per the recommendation, even if the students aren't back in school or only back on a part-time basis, these supports could still be utilized for at-home studies for these students. Is this not correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, these supports would actually be very beneficial on the ground for students who are returning back to school, and the profiles of the schools that are likely to be selected in this next round would have students that have a higher, a higher incidence perhaps of vulnerability, and the resource support that would be available on the ground will be very beneficial to reintegrating students back into a school experience, particularly in the changed school experience that they're going to have. So having additional supports on the ground is going to be beneficial at the school level.
Thank you, everybody. I think we've had a very fulsome discussion on this. As I did with the previous topic, I'm going to propose the motion again, and I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, and it's very similar. That the proposal for enhancing the Power Up program identified through the trustee planning sessions during January 2020 to April 2020 be the focus of staff reports for discussion during 2020-2021 for possible inclusion in the 2021-2022 budget deliberations. I'm looking for a mover.
I'll move it, Mr. Chair. McDonald.
I thank you. I'm looking for a seconder.
I'll second it, Chair.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If
Yes,
not,
Yes,
I have a comment.
I have
okay.
I have a question. Okay.
Go ahead, Trustee McPherson.
Yes. Last year, the board subsidized the special education budget by the tune of $7 million. The year before that, it was $10.7 million. The beauty of the special instance funding was that by changing our model of delivery, as was recommended in the special education report, we will lessen the dependency of special education on the GSNs. Those monies saved can be used to support all students, special education, and everyone in some of the other 8 to 10 ideas that we had in our budget deliberations as conducted by Trustee Cram. So that's a comment, and that's my finals.
Thank you very much, Trustee. I just want to point out to everybody that we are having, I've asked you to reserve potentially the dates of June 24th, July 8th, 15th, and 22nd for budget deliberations. So based on the previous motion, I'm going to propose, I've already proposed the motion. Is there a mover or a seconder?
Okay, I thought you already got that.
Yeah, we have that. Yes, we have that.
Then would you
Isn't
cast?
it discussion still? Because I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Trustee.
I'm very much in favor of the proposal to implement it in 5 more schools, part 1 of the proposal for this year in September, when I think our students that are in this program or that could benefit in this program. I think Superintendent Perry's made it very clear there is huge benefits to put it in the schools in September, no matter what our school model looks like, in my opinion. And also there's potential for funding here from the government. We haven't seen it yet, but it's of benefit to our students. So I'm against the motion. I'd like to see at least the first part of the motion implementing it in 5 more schools. We have 70 schools that are interested, if I'm correct. Put it in the 5 neediest schools that we measure that however we measure them, and expand this program in the 5 schools. The cost is not huge, and anyway, so that's my opinion, and I'd like to propose a motion to that effect after we vote on this.
Trustee Swan, just to be clear, the motion that has been proposed does not preclude discussing this further on the 24th, the 8th, the 15th, or the 22nd. It could still happen.
Okay, well, I can't see a written motion, but my understanding was we were putting it over to
No.
next year's budget.
No, it's the motion. I'll read it again. That the proposal for enhancing the Power Up program identified through the trustee planning sessions during 2020 to April 2020 be the focus of staff reports for discussion during the 2020-2021 for possible inclusion in the 2021-22 budget deliberations. So
yeah, yes, and you're saying for inclusion in 21-22, I'd like it in 2021, so that's where we differ. I'd like the five spots put in 2021.
It will be up for discussion in our discussions for 2020-2021. So if something changes then, at that point, it can be included. So trustees, I'm going to call the question.
Can we have it in writing, please?
Chair, I would dispute what you're saying. I would agree with Trustee Swan. The motion say the 21-22 budget, not the 2021 budget. The discussion occurs during 2021 for inclusion in the 21-22 budget. That's what my reading of that motion is.
Okay, stand corrected. I'm still going to call the question on that motion. Does anybody want to hear it again?
Can we have it in writing, please? In the comment section? Or in the other forum we're using?
Okay.
Thank you.
I think there it is there now. Do you have it?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Folks, I'm going to ask you to cast your ballots on that motion, please.
I'm against it. I can't find it in my board docs because I just got kicked out.
Chair McAllister, would you like to ask Trustee Barry how he would like to vote?
Sure. Trustee Barry, could you tell me how you would like to vote, please?
Thank you. Chair McAllister, that motion carries.
Thank you very much, everybody. I believe that concludes our discussion on item 501. I am now going to move to 502, which is, I'm sorry, I'm skipping here between screens, which is a review of the Leadership and Performance Review Handbook for the evaluation of the Director's Performance Appraisal, Policy 1001, June 10, 2020. I guess this is up to me to address this issue, and it's really a matter of information and not specific to the evaluation of any one person. I guess there are several points here. We've been dealing with this for the past 10 months, and we have come up with an appendix, or a different appendix, to Policy 1001. Policy 1001 does not change at all because it's very simple and straightforward. What does change is the appendix. So we have been working with a consultant who is an expert on performance, and we, we have come up with a new document, and it's a rethink based on the guiding principles. And the guiding principles are that one, that it aligns with the district's strategic priorities and commitment to students and communities. 2, it focuses exclusively and primarily on the director's performance against the metrics. 3, it optimizes the energies, efforts, and time of trustees, the director, and staff, minimizing unnecessary and lengthy presentations. 4, it's uncomplicated, easy to understand, and allows for some flexibility in the final product. 5, it creates the space and time for informal, in-depth, and engaging conversation and dialogue. 6, it satisfies the board's statutory, fiduciary, and legal obligations. 7, it generates constructive feedback to support the director's professional development. And finally, is defensible and supported by evidence. So there are 4 components to this revised manual or handbook, whatever you want to call it. The first is the ongoing, which we've always had, the quarterly reports. An innovation is the informal check-in, which is off the record and in a very informal setting where trustees and the director can chat. And the third one, which again was incorporated in the previous policy, which was a 360-degree review done every 4 years or more often as decided. And finally, and probably most importantly, is the performance review dashboard with 4 goals and 16 indicators, which we have come up with. And these indicators were directed by you, the trustees. And so essentially this, the purpose of the item on this agenda is for information, because we will be getting to it later specifically. But are there any further questions? Any questions on this? I know Michael is going to be on the line later in private session. Michael, are you here now, perchance? No, I didn't think so. We didn't expect him now. Any questions, folks? If not, I'm going to move to item 601, which is to move into private session. And just let me get my, I'm sorry, I have a lot of papers going around here. It's moved by Trustee Parizien, seconded by Trustee Danaher, that the Upper Canada District School Board move into Committee of the Whole special meeting June 10th at 7:58 p.m. Would you please cast your ballots online?
Chair McAllister, that motion carries. And
there is a second motion now that the Committee of the Whole move into private session June 10th, 2020 at 7:58 p.m. And it's moved by Trustee McCray, seconded by Trustee McDonald. Please cast your ballots.
Chair, can I ask a question first?
Yes, you may.
Are we going to the private session on Teams? Are we moving over to our other area?
I believe we are doing this on momentum conferencing. Am I correct, Director?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. And Ms. Workman had sent the momentum conference line call number to trustees. Perhaps she can recirculate that if people would like to have that at their immediate fingertips.
I got it. I just want to make sure that's what we were doing. Thanks.
So we are moving now out of this public session completely and moving into private session using momentum conferencing. Is that correct? Everybody understand that? So why don't I give everybody about 5 minutes to reconnect using momentum conferencing and the coordinates that